average cell phone user has between 500 and 1,000 images of themselves on their cellular device. Colloquially, it's called a selfie. And it's quite a bizarre thing when you start to think about it. You go through somebody's phone, their library on their phone, it's images of me, potentially a cat, maybe a curated image of a artisanal coffee and a meme that was sent to them, but predominantly me. And it's so bizarre when you think about it that we've got this incredible technology that is able to send a signal to space and back in mere milliseconds. And the predominant use of these devices is to take images of ourselves. And that's probably the very actual reality of the problem of our society, of our sinful hearts, is that we are the objects of our worship. We're the objects of our desires, we turn our eyes inward. And A.W. Tozer once said this. He said that we were designed to have an eternal preoccupation with God. And yet the enemy's number one strategy is to turn, if I can pull the metaphor inwards, to turn the camera of our lives onto ourselves again and again. We keep the eyes of the lens of the camera of our lives on ourselves, on our sin, on our sickness, on our shame, on our situations, what we're going through. And actually God is saying, no, would you turn it again to me? And that is, in the very essence, what worship is, turning our eyes upon God. The scripture says in Isaiah 6 verse 1, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. I think the problem with us is that when things die, when things go awry, when things go wrong, or actually sometimes when things go well, the enemy wants us to look at those things, look at the good, the bad, the ugly, when actually worship is the discipline of retraining our hearts to again and again look outwards, away from self, and look to God. There's 4 reasons why God says we should worship. Number 1 is we should worship Him because He deserves it. He deserves it. Every image and every vision of heaven that we see in Scripture is not of God doing something trivial or trite, like trimming His beard or mowing the lawn. No. Every vision of heaven is of God seated, exalted on His throne. And there's this high view of God that is in turn the response, and every vision of heaven in Scripture is of the people falling down and worshiping Him, responding to what they see of God. And the Scriptures actually start in that place. In the beginning, God. And if we start anywhere else with the camera on ourselves or our situation or our sin, shame, wherever, we're going to end up in a place that's very small, insignificant, and lacking the power that God has for us. He deserves it. Secondly, He demands it. Jesus Himself says, if we do not worship, the very rocks will cry out. He demands it. And actually, Augustine, the great church father, said that God is great and we are but a speck. And yet the problem is that we actually have turned that around. We say that we are great and God is a segment of our lives. We've reduced worship just to a 20-minute slot on a Sunday or a moment when actually worship should be our discipline, a response, a perpetual response of turning our eyes back upon God. He demands it. And thirdly, He desires it. He says, come to me all who are weary, all who are burdened and heavy laden. Come to me. He has opened the way. He wants us to engage with Him in worship. He deserves it, He demands it, He desires it. But fourthly, this is where our responsibility lies. Our response is we need to decide it. We've got to decide again and again, make the decision to worship Him. That's why we're calling it the discipline of worship. This is not just a feeling, it's a focus. And there's 2 times to worship Him. When you feel like it and when you don't. And when we make that decision in our hearts again and again, that when our eyes turn away to worship Him, we start to see something different, because as Matt Redman once said, that worship starts with seeing Him. And actually, worship's not just a song. It's not just a style. It's a line of sight of what are we seeing? Are we seeing ourselves? Are we seeing our sin, our shame? Or are we seeing Him? And worship is the mechanism, the discipline of retraining our eyes to turn our affections to Jesus. G.K. Chesterton once said, a burning heart leads to a flaming tongue. So once we've seen Him, try stop us from singing. Try stop us from proclaiming His wonders and His might. This is who we are called to be. I will bless the Lord at all times. That is the discipline of worship.